This revision video will help you with Section B of your A Christmas Carol Edexcel exam board paper 2 English Literature exam. For your Section B, you don't have a copy of the novella in front of you. It is called a closed book exam, which means you've not got a copy of the text. So you need to remember the quotations. Now, you don't have to remember them word for word, but you need to know them as best you can. So over the next few revision videos, I'm going to take a stave at a time and in chronological order give you a timeline of key quotations that you may be able to use within your Section B question with explanations of their meaning. Okay? So stave 1 of A Christmas Carol begins where Scrooge, Ebenezer Scrooge, calls Marley, Jacob Marley, his old business partner, who has died 7 years before, where Scrooge is described as his sole friend and sole mourner. So what that means is Scrooge was Marley's only friend, his only ally in life, and the only person to grieve his death. And this is because they had so much in common, in so much as their main goal in life was to make as much money as they could. Scrooge is described in stave 1 as a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. What that means is that he's mercenary, and that means he likes to keep hold of his money and to hoard it rather than to spend it. And a hand at the grindstone means he's obsessed with work, and that was purely so he could hoard that money and watch the pile of money go bigger and bigger and bigger to make himself feel superior to the poor. So he wouldn't get any enjoyment from it, he wouldn't spend it on anybody, let alone himself. It was purely entirely for his own self-gratification, to make himself feel important. He's also described as hard and sharp as flint. When he's described as hard, it means he's hard-hearted, he's cold-hearted, and that he doesn't care about other people, that he's apathetic to the suffering and to the plights of other people, particularly the poor. When he's described as sharp, it could mean he's got a sharp mind, but it could mean he's got a sharp tongue. Not literally, it means he's cruel with his words. He's described as like flint. Now, flint is a type of stone that is cold and again very hard to reflect the idea that Scrooge is very hard-hearted, but it's used, flint, to create fire, to create warmth. So that suggests that in the future Scrooge has the potential to change and the potential to show some love and some warmth towards other people. So you may want to use that reference in any question about Scrooge or greed or selfishness or anything like that. He's described as solitary as an oyster. Now, oysters live on the bottom of the seabed, away from civilization. That reflects the idea and mirrors this feeling that Scrooge exists away from society, away from civilization, and he imposes isolation on himself. That is what he likes. He likes to be away from other people. He's solitary, he's alone, and that's the way he likes it. Oysters have a closed, hard shell on the outside, indicative of Scrooge being, again, closed off from other people and disinterested in them. But inside of an oyster is this precious, softer pearl. That again implies that in the future there is the capacity for change for Scrooge. He may become warmer and kinder towards others. Okay? In stave 1, Charles Dickens says that heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. So he's unaffected by the weather. He's almost robotic, he's almost monstrous, almost inhuman and numb. When he was out, no beggar would implore of him, and nobody would ask him what it was o'clock, so people stay away from him. No warmth could warm him, no wintry weather could chill him, reinforcing this idea of him being unfeeling and not responding to the weather. He's described as a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, covetous old sinner. What that means is he will squeeze as much money, as much wealth as possible out of any situation. He will wrench money away from people. He will grasp as much money as he can. Covetous means greedy. A better word for greedy is avaricious. You may want to try and use that. And he's also a sinner. So he's not afraid to commit sins in order to extract this money from poor people. And he does that by loaning them money and then pressurising them for it back when they can't afford to pay it back, and by putting big interest rates, unfair interest rates on it. He has a clerk called Bob Cratchit, who is a pauper. He's impoverished, he's poor. Because of this, Scrooge doesn't believe that Bob is worthy, and the office that he gives him is described as a dismal little cell, an uncomfortable, small, prison-like office, and he keeps him in these prison-like conditions because Scrooge believes Bob deserves to be punished for the crime of being poor, as if that is a chosen path, which of course was a flawed argument because the poverty was enforced on the poor. The clerk's fire, Bob Cratchit's fire within the office, was so very much smaller than Scrooge's. He only allowed him one coal. He tells him to poke the fire rather than to add more coal to it, because again, as he's poor, Scrooge believes he doesn't deserve human necessities like the comfort of being warm. We are also introduced to another character in Stave 1, that of Fred, who is Scrooge's nephew, the only son of his sister Fan, who died a young woman. When we meet Fred, he's come to Scrooge's office, to Scrooge's workshop to invite him around for Christmas lunch, and Scrooge rejects his nephew Fred. One of the first things that Fred says is, "A Merry Christmas, Uncle, God save you," and we see this real love of Christmas from Fred, and this yearning and this desire to spend Christmas Day with his family and to include Scrooge in that. When he says "God save you," Fred seems to understand that Scrooge is in need, desperate need of God's forgiveness for the way that he treats the poor and his attitude towards others. Scrooge replies with "Bah, humbug," and he says, "I don't make merry myself at Christmas. I can't afford to make idle people merry. I don't want to spend my Christmas with you." And he rejects Fred and will not go round for Christmas dinner. Now Fred remains patient, says, "Don't be angry, Uncle." And he tries to persuade Scrooge to believe in and to invest in the idea of Christmas and the spirit of Christmas. He tells his uncle that Christmas is a kind, forgiving, generous time. So it's a time to forgive others. It's a time to be generous and to give to others when people are suffering the most. And it's a time to treat those below us, those poorer than us, as fellow passengers to the grave, rather than another race of creatures bound on a different journey. So a time to treat people equally. He also tells his uncle that Christmas should be respected for its veneration. That means for its religious importance, for its true meaning, to worship God and to say thank you to God. Because of Fred's belief in Christmas and his love for others and his desire to be with his family and his love of family, his respect for his family, this is reflected in his appearance. He's described as ruddy, so he has colour in his cheeks, he's blushing, and handsome, so he's good looking. His eyes sparkle and his breath smokes in the fresh air, so you can see signs of life, you can see signs of excitement. the spirit of Christmas is reflected in his attractive appearance. So the goodness inside is reflected on the outside. Scrooge's reaction to his nephew. He asks him, "What right have you got to be merry? You're poor." So Scrooge seems to believe that in order to be happy, you must be wealthy. And he scorns the idea of Fred getting married because he fell in love. So when Fred tells his uncle that he got married because he fell in love, Scrooge scorns that idea and mocks it and says, "Because you fell in love," and he growls that as if that is a ridiculous idea. So Scrooge is unable to love other people, only money. He idolises and worships that instead. Okay? So in Stave 1, at the beginning, you have this real strong image of Scrooge as avaricious, as greedy, as inhuman, as unfeeling, hard-hearted, but with this capacity to change. So on our next revision video, I will go on to Marley's ghost and when his old business partner visits Scrooge to warn him and to show him his fate unless he changes. Okay, so tune in for that one. I will post that later this week. Thanks for listening.